Dr. Ron Daniels drop wisdom you won't hear anywhere else on leadership, reparations, Malcolm X, and the future of black communities. Watch the full powerful reasoning only on www.inevernewtv.com premium. You brought up chattel slavery, right? And its uniqueness in regards to the structure and also the longevity of it, right? Based on your research and information, did they just create chattel slavery, the idea, on their own, or did they adopt it and morph it from another form of slavery? Like, how did it go to a situation where you were enslaved for a certain amount of period of time, you could still marry, you could still work, to a point where the duration of your life, you're enslaved under those conditions?
No, they created it. And the idea is, and first of all, we have to disabuse people of the myth that slavery was based on Europeans' perception of inferiority. It was a labor system. They needed cheap labor. They needed free. Well, they needed. Well, initially, they adopted a different form of slavery. But the point is, they didn't go to Africa because they thought the people were inferior. They didn't really care about that. You know, they had exhausted through brutal genocide. That's why it's always principled to put Native people first. First of all, in the U.S., you know, they decimated Native nations here, but they also decimated. I don't know. We don't even know what the numbers are in the Caribbean.
Caribs, your Arawaks, your Taínos.
All of them. I mean, just decimate. I mean, and some of it was through brutality, but some of it was from the diseases. I mean, they just had no adaptation to some of the diseases that just wiped out, you know, millions of people. So initially, the form of slavery that was adopted early on was a form of slavery which allowed you to have a term limit. You know, you worked 7 years, and then you could be free. Right, indentured servitude. You can be free, and that indentured servitude largely meant not only Africans but also Europeans. See, it's the other thing. Just quickly, I have to, you know, the history. You know, this history. Oh, you know, what they brought from England. They brought all these criminals to the United States and so forth. Close examination of that history shows something different. It shows the criminalization of the peasants who are being displaced from the feudal manners, driven into the cities, just like after slavery. You see what I'm saying? And that's why in my classes, that's why that critical thinking, because that's all these criminals. No, they weren't criminal. They were criminalized. And having been criminalized, then they were sent over here. But these were not like murderers and rapists and all that. These were just people who just, you know, and they slapped the same laws on them: vagrancy, loitering, you know, and all that kind of stuff. Those laws, same kind of laws they did at post emancipation on Africans in this country. So they came, brought them here, but they after 7 years they could be freed. Because the way Europe was evolving, there was evolving greater evolution towards more democratic systems, more rights of human beings and so forth were developing. Well, how you going? It's kind of hard then to enslave your own people like that. But now with Africans, that was a different story. And not only that, identifiable. See, with white folks, I mean, you know, even if they were indentured, if they faded away, how you going to identify them? So that's why they created. This is unparalleled. I mean, there was slavery in Rome, there was slavery in Egypt, but it was the kind of slavery where you'd be a slave in one generation and you might be king in the next generation. Certainly that was the case in Africa. In native nations, the absorbed people in wars and whatnot, and we don't need to glorify, and some of it was bloody in some instances and so forth, particularly among native nations. But you could then become absorbed and be a part of that nation. So this form of chattel slavery is what Kenneth Clark called the peculiar institution. It was the creation of Europeans. Only Europeans created this concept, particularly the British American form of chattel slavery, where enslaved people were reduced to property. And that so much so that there was a whole body of law called chattel law that regulated this peculiar form of enslavement. So that never happened ever before in human history, and that certainly did not happen in Africa in terms of creating that kind of diminution of human beings to the level of, being, like Malcolm said, like a cow, a chicken, or a horse. You were less than a human being. So no, this is, and there's a greater story to be said about Africans in America that's even more brutal in terms of what I call cultural aggression, the decimation, the idea of trying to completely obliterate identity and whatever. You don't see that. In fact, that is one of the great distinctions between what happened in the U.S. and what happened everywhere else. Slavery was brutal everywhere. But if you go to Brazil, if you go to Cuba, if you go to various places, you will find people speaking pure Yoruba, because there was not an effort to de-Africanize the African. Only in the United States was there a constant attempt to de-Africanize the African. And so that's why we have and then there was the effort to keep us from aggregating, because they understood if you had too many Yoruba together, too many Ashanti or Fanta together, they would in fact cohere and rebel. Forbid us from speaking our own language or playing drums and all of that. So when you really think about that, imagine the ingenuity of black people who can be barred from playing their musical instruments and yet find a way to take their musical form and push it into European instruments, and out of that comes the blues. Out of that comes jazz and the Negro spirituals, which allows people to be right in master's face and talk about, we want to sail away to Jesus. And the master's, look how, and they talking about how to get the hell out of here because they came on a ship called Jesus. It was a part of their historical memory. So again, when you start talking about the ancestors, I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking about the ability of a people coming out of Trinidad to take an oil drum, an oil barrel, and transform it into one of the most beautiful musical instruments humankind has ever. The steel drum. That's who we are. So that's what, to me, when we start talking about the whole question of how you move a people, then you begin to connect to the ancient truths of Kemet, lasting back thousands and thousands of years. Then we start, that's what produces a Malcolm. That's what produces a people in the face of all of this. And that's sort of the centrality of the heart of our ethos and our ethic and our worldview, that what I call is when we are in our right mind. When we are in our right mind, we are inconquerable. Not because we want to conquer the world, but because we have an ethic and a system that at its base is humanistic, as opposed to others who have a conquering, warlike, whatever mentality. So that's, to me, is what also drives me, a sense of, but also it drives me because I want people to understand that if you are in public office, nobody's perfect, but don't get all caught up in the corruption and say, but the white folks do it. And so if the white folks do it, how come they only pick it? I don't care about what white people are doing. I want to know what we are doing. What is our ethic? And it must be rooted in my art, the ancient Kemetic notion of righteousness, justice, and balance. And when we're driven that way, then it's almost irresistible, which is another thing I discovered when the Jesse Jackson campaign. Because when we are on our right mind, other people follow. I was able to witness thousands upon thousands of white people I would have not even believed it, given who were coming out on the farms in Iowa and coming out in places like Oregon and Washington by the thousands, not 15, thousands of people who were coming out under the leadership of Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson, because they were inspired by the best of who we are as African people.